Okay, everyone. Welcome back. This is the last chapter of midterm two. And so this should be wrapping up this content. Today, we're going to be talking about competitive firms and markets. So we've done a lot of journey so far. We've talked a lot about supply and demand and consumer side of the market and firm side of the market and costs to the firm and all sorts of different things that go into a market. But one of these key assumptions that we've had, or one of the things that we maybe haven't outlined, is that all of these things are in a competitive market. And the only thing that is really keeping all of these assumptions and makes everything work in the way that we've been thinking about it are competitive firms. And so we're just going to iron out a couple of things related to competitive firms today, perfectly competitive firms, and then in a perfectly competitive market. And then for the start of the next content for the final, we'll get into a little bit of what happens when markets aren't competitive and you've got only one buyer or only one seller or all sorts of things. And so we're going to diverge a little bit from the trends for the final. We're going to talk a little bit about game theory, a little bit about general equilibriums. But for the most part, this is going to be, we're going to just wrap up competitive firms for now. So this is chapter 8. Couple of things we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to talk about perfect competition. So a perfectly competitive firm is a price taker, which means that the firms do not set their price, right? If they set a price too high, people are just going to go to a different member of the market, and so they're going to have to lower their price to get people to come back. So the firms are price takers. And as such, it's going to face a pretty horizontal demand curve, which means that remember their price is going to be set at the y-axis, and so the demand curve is going to be flat. Profit maximization. To maximize profit, any firm must make two decisions: what output level to maximize its profits or minimize its loss, and whether to produce at all, so whether you should just go home. Then we're going to talk about competition in the short run, so talking about variable costs that determine profit maximization, competitive firm supply curve, the market supply curve, the market demand curve, competitive equilibriums, and competition in the long run, which is firm supply, market supply, competitive equilibrium are different because firms can vary inputs. And we've talked a little bit about short and long run. So it's not going to be super big and it's not going to be incredibly different, but we're going to talk about three videos today. So this first one, let's just introduce perfect competition. So what is perfect competition? Well, what does it look like? It's going to be typically what we would normally have, right? So when you're imagining a market, you are probably imagining a perfectly competitive market. So there's going to be so many buyers, so many sellers, and they're all typically, we're going to assume that they're going to be identical. So that means that they're going to um, be buying the same things and selling the same goods. And so there's going to be something back and forth. There might be multiple markets inside one market, right? So if we're thinking about like an open air market, there might be fruit, or like a farmer's market, there might be a fruit seller, there might be a bread seller, there might be a artisan seller that's selling like shirts or something. They all exist in like one physical location. But those are going to be three markets. There's going to be the fruit market and the bread market and the clothes market. And so within that market, we're going to assume that all of those, like within one of those markets, they're going to be selling the same goods, and there's going to be lots of them that are selling the same goods, lots of firms, and then there's going to be lots of people that are going to be buying the same goods. And so, what are some features of perfect competition, right? So there's going to be this thing called price taking, which we had alluded to a little bit beforehand. But if you imagine that me and my neighbor are two firms in a competitive market, I have my price set at the equilibrium. So let's say the equilibrium price for coffee is $5. My neighbor Sam is selling a coffee for $7, and our shops are right next to each other. We sell the exact same coffee. It tastes the exact same. We make it the exact same way. We used to be partners, but he split off because who knows why. That's getting into some politics. But we sell the exact same thing, exact same recipe, everything. People are never going to pay $7 for a coffee if I'm selling it for $5 next door. And so similarly, like people are just going to keep going lower and lower and lower. And so firms will work together to price at the equilibrium price because otherwise, if they're making too little money, all of the firms will exit the market. And so, what are the consequences of perfect competition for producers and consumers? Is typically they are profit neutral, which means that they are operating just enough to cover their marginal costs. And we'll get to that a little bit in a bit. So, what are some features of a perfectly competitive market? So, this is a picture of Shakedown Street, which is an open air market that follows around the Grateful Dead. So, whenever the Grateful Dead go and perform a show, all of their fans will set up different tents in like a parking lot. And for the 3 day show, they will sell and they will mingle and they will do everything. But everybody is about like is selling the same thing. They're all selling tie-dye t-shirts, they're all selling grilled cheese sandwiches, they're all selling everything. But there is going to be a large number of tents that exist in this market, right? There's going to be a large number of firms. There's going to be people that are selling all the time. Otherwise, why would they follow around? Um, Firms are also going to sell identical products, right? So we're going to be thinking more and more about like, oh, yes, this firm is going to be selling one brand of t-shirts versus another. That could be a little bit different. So we're going to sell identical products. Buyer and sellers are going to have full information about the prices. So the buyers are going to know exactly what the sellers are selling, and the sellers are going to know exactly what they could sell at. And then the other thing that is important here are transaction costs are low. So it's not going to cost a lot for one person to go from one place to another. And so it's not, or it's going to be zero. And so you don't need to worry about like, oh, I'm going to buy this because I'm already in this store, right? So the transaction cost between moving from one to another, like leaving one deal and going to another is going to be zero. And then similarly from firms is they can freely enter and exit the market. So if they think that the market is, they're able to capitalize on the market, they will jump in the market. If they think that the market is not favorable and they're not going to make too little money, they can also leave the market. And so then we have this thing called the competitive firms demand, right? And so one of the things here is that we need to say that our marginal revenue is going to be equal to our average revenue, which is equal to the price. And this is our price taking formula. So this is a price taker, right? If marginal revenues are equal to price, then this is going to be a price taker. The firm's demand is then going to be a straight line, right? So we have something that looks like this, and we're going to be at P. Then if our price is the exact same, then we are going to have it just be completely horizontal, and our marginal revenues are going to be equal to that price. An individual firm then faces this thing called a residual demand curve. And the firm's residual demand is equal to this market demand minus the other's supply. And so the way that you would think about this is let's say that the market is demanding 500 t-shirts. And so let's come back up here. So let's say that there are people in this market that want 500 t-shirts. If there's only a seller, like if the number of sellers there are only able to cover 450 t-shirts, then the residual demand that you're able to capitalize on and it would be able to sell would be 50 t-shirts. And so when we have these 50 t-shirts, that is going to be able to like that is going to be what we're going to be able to capitalize on. And so the residual demand curve at any given price is the horizontal difference between the market demand curve and the supply curve of other firms. So if we look at this, right, we can see that let's suppose that the market is exactly at the equilibrium, right? So our price is $66. When our demand intersects with the supply, when the market demand, because this is market demand, um, so this is market demand, when it intersects with the supply of other, like the other firm supply, so again, this is other supply, there's no room for us to enter the market. So at $66, we are not going to supply anything. However, suppose the price dropped to $63. Then we are going to be priced like the quantity demanded is 527. So if we said the market demand, so market demand was 527, and the supply by other firms would be 434. The difference between those two is 93. And so at $63, we are able to produce 93 metal chairs, right? And so that is, or 93,000 metal chairs, right? And so that's the concept of residual demand, is that essentially you're taking this horizontal difference between at any given price so that you would be able to know what the market would allow between the two. And so the residual demand curve also lends itself to some elasticity analysis. When we're thinking about elasticities, the residual demand curve that each firm faces in panel A, right up here, so in this A, is much flatter than the market demand curve is in panel B, right? And so if we were thinking about the elasticities, because when we're dealing with flatness of a demand curve, it helps us to think about elasticities. The elasticity of the residual demand curve is much higher than the market elasticity. And we can define this as this epsilon I, and then this thing on the right is going to be our, well, this would be our demand as well. So given our epsilon, so this would be the elasticity of residual demand for firm I when there are n firms, right? So n firms here, and we're going to assume that they're identical. So supposing that n is equal to 78, so let's go EI should be 78. The market demand, I mean, the market elasticity of demand is minus 1.1. We're going to subtract 77, multiply this by 3.1. This is going to come out to be minus 342.5, which is so much higher, or I get in magnitude, than minus 1.1. So assuming identical firms, which is a common approach in economics, the elasticity of demand for a single firm is this. Um, Sorry, let me close my email so that doesn't pop up again. And so when the firms faced an elasticity of minus 342.5, but the markets is 1.1, that means that if a firm rises its price by 1/10%, the quantity it can sell for falls by nearly 1/3. Thus, the firm faces essentially horizontal demand. Um, And that's kind of the beginning, I mean, the end of perfect competition. And it will lead us into this thing called profit maximization in the second video. And I will catch you guys in the second video.